the inspiration behind people working in Catholic health and aged care, and I'm sure for Christians working in that any of those fields, is clearly the person of Jesus. To connect with him and learn from him, we go to the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, who each in their own way offer portraits of this beautiful man to inspire us to live the life that he lived and that he came to share with us. But it's critical, as I'm sure you're aware, that when we look at the Gospel, we need to know how to read them, because they clearly connected with the people for whom they were intended, but they don't always connect directly with us. Sometimes we think of the Gospel scenes, for example, as little snapshots, little videos of picking up exactly what happened, exactly what was said, and picking up a particular event. But it's much more like walking through a portrait gallery. These Gospels were written by people who loved Jesus, and they were thinking, obviously everything they said was based on what he said and heard. It was the real Jesus, they weren't improving on him. But how do you communicate that to people, say, in Rome or in Syria or in Egypt? Or how do you communicate this to people who didn't ever know Jesus, and yet you want them to feel, to experience something of what you're saying? Ultimately, only a lover can write a gospel. And I think it's true to say that we can only read it if we're going to be open to what it's trying to tell us. Let's take, for example, I'll start with Mark, because it's the original gospel, and it's early tradition, 2nd century tradition says that it's Peter who inspired it. So there's going to be hundreds of memories behind what Mark paints in words in this portrait, and goes back and gathers stuff from the Old Testament, for example, to get the imagery, and speaks to people in a Roman world who are used to reading this or were studying in the Stoic schools. So what was he doing? He was writing quite shortly after the death of Peter and Paul in that dreadful first state-organised persecution under Nero. Obviously the community were bewildered, they were wondering what they were doing, they were doubting their faith, probably many of them, and wondering what they thought it was going to be about love and meaning, and yet this dreadful thing had happened to them. So what Mark is presenting, with Peter looking over his shoulder, is, look, we were like that too. We didn't understand him either. We were missing the point of what was going on, but they came to see it. So Peter's getting Mark to create these scenes which show Jesus reaching people in their need, in their suffering, in their brokenness, and obviously reaching them effectively. A couple of things we need to be clear about. One is that when the healing scenes of Jesus are not trying to help us, they wouldn't have made sense in Rome. They're not about Jesus eliminating suffering. I guess that's obvious, but they're not about that, because we suffer. Jesus suffered, the apostles suffered, the people in Rome suffered that Mark's writing for. So suffering is, but Jesus showed us how to live with it, how not to be dragged down by it, how to find a kind of a deeper meaning and a belonging and a love, communion in their suffering. A second thing that needs to be clear, I think, before I look at some of the scenes with you, is where Jesus is coming from is absolutely critical. He's coming from an experience of God, of intense communion with God and intimacy. And it's out of that that Jesus is able to look into the souls of the people we'll look at in a moment and see how loved they were. And obviously for many of them, this look, this touch, this presence of Jesus, they thought, yes, I am loved where I am. It's his teaching that is making, for example, the first healing miracle or scene of Jesus is in a synagogue. I'll take you there for a minute. And in the synagogue, there's a man who's obviously terribly disturbed. And Jesus brings him a healing. And if you read Mark, it's right in chapter 1, the people in the synagogue, their commentary was not, oh, how does he heal people like this? Their comment was, what teaching this is. He teaches like someone with authority, not like our scribes. They're stunned by what Jesus has said, and it's that that heals. What Jesus said, of course, is about love. It's about meaning. It's about everyone being precious in the eyes of God and in each other's eyes, if only we could dare to speak to heart. Let me take you through some of the scenes now. All in chapter 1. There's a woman there who's got the fever. It's Peter's mother-in-law, and she's got the fever. She can't do what a woman would like to do and prepare the meal and got it all prepared, I suppose, and is feeling. Somehow Jesus comes into her life and calms her down, and she is able to serve them. The fever didn't stop her caring. You can still love. Another scene, there's a man who comes in, he's paralysed. But if you look at this picture, and we're going through the art gallery, and this is not just an ordinary paralysis. This is something quite unusual about this paralysis. He's paralysed because of decisions he's made in the past, and how often this can happen to us and to the people we care for. Things he's done in the past are still affecting him. He's locked into it. He can't move. He can't see a way forward. He's despairing of movement and life. And Jesus says, you might recall the scene, your sins are forgiven. He helps this man see that what he's done in the past, yes, he has to acknowledge it, face it, name it, learn from it, but it doesn't tie him down. It doesn't bind him in. He can actually free. He can walk again. Love can heal those things. It's the leper, called a leper, we don't know what it wasn't leprosy as we know it, but he's got some kind of skin complaint which in the ancient world there was a taboo. It reminded them of death. He had to be, and according to the book of Leviticus, in God's name, he had to be banished out of the community. So he was banished out of the community, obeying the rules. But something about Jesus is so attractive. This man breaks all the rules, comes to Jesus, looks him in the eye and says, if you want to, you could heal me. I don't know what was going on inside Jesus, but we're told, moved with intense compassion, Jesus embraces this leper. He shouldn't have. The rules said don't, but of course he did. He embraced him and said, of course I want to. Be healed. And then he ensures that the man is welcomed back into the community, that his relationships are mended, and he goes back to his wife and family and life again. Healed, deeply healed in his spirit. And of course love is such a healer. It's not surprising, is it, that if someone loves the way Jesus loved, it would bring psychological healing often, not always, but often, and why not physical too at times? Because the whole person has somehow got a chance to live again.